We have already seen URLs earlier many times, but right now we are going to go somewhat detail into the structure of the URL, of any URL. So URL, we already know that it is used to uniquely identify and locate a particular resource on the internet. Now, this is a particular URL and different parts of it I have highlighted in different colors. And by now you might be aware of these different segments. For example, this thing is what? This thing is protocol, or also called scheme. This part, the blue part, is called the domain name, right? Just wanted to highlight the fact that in a URL, so even if you call it domain name, right, but in place of this you can use IP address also. And when you use IP address, you don't say that that is domain name, you say that this URL is constructed using IP address, not domain name. That's it, right? It's not that in every way, whenever a URL is created, whatever comes here we call that domain. It's not that like the case, right? If the human readable way is written, then only it is called domain name. If any particular IP address is mentioned, then that is simply a URL constructed with IP address. Okay, so we mentioned earlier also that if we directly put IP address, then also that sometimes the web server can be configured to directly give us the resources using directly IP address. One more thing to highlight is that when we are using IP addresses, let's say whatever is the IP address of www.example.com, and I write that IP address here, that does not mean that both of these URLs will have the same origin. You understand, right? So if I replace, then both replace the domain name with IP address, then still both the URLs will point to the same resource, but they will be not same origin, they will be different origin. Why? Because port match, protocol match is happening, but this part is not matching. At one place you are writing domain name, another place you are writing IP address, and that is a as per the definition of origins, that is simply origin mismatch. So just wanted to highlight that. Next, obviously, this part is called the port. If it is omitted, then whatever is the standard port that we assume. Now, if we are not using a standard port, let's say we are starting HTTP protocol at 8000 port, right? Then it is 8000. HTTP, this server is running and serving HTTP at 8000. That is fine. But if it is not given, then we generally assume the standard ports which are available for web services. For example, 443 for HTTPS, 80 for HTTP, like that. Okay. Now, this rest of the part is obviously the path to the resource which we are trying to access. The important thing to note here is that whether it is a virtual file, or which means that abstract path, or it is actually a physical file, which means that it is an actual file system location on the server, that depends on what type of server. It both can happen, but generally it is a physical file only when it is a static web server. If it is a dynamic web server, then dynamic web server, this can be anything. It doesn't need to be this same file need not exist on the server. Why? Because web server is the one in middle which is able to configure all these, which means that in web server we can configure that if something like this URL comes, then serve some different file, or generate some file on the fly. These things we can configure, but that can only happen when it is a programmable server, which means that some web application server rather than a static web server. It should be a dynamic web server in some case. Then only that is possible, right? A new term here is introduced, which is authority, right? So authority includes both domain name and port separated by colon. So you can understand that it is like similar to origin, right? In origin we had a protocol, domain and port. Here we simply have domain and port. So just a new terminology, that if domain colon port, that part is called authority. So in short we can say that, okay, the double slash and the first single slash, between that whatever is there, that thing is called authority, right? Which will have domain name followed by port separated by colon, right? Now we will talk about absolute URLs. Absolute URLs, the path part of the URL should start with slash, right? Then they are called absolute URLs. So something like this part, right? So these are absolute URLs. There is, in contrast, you might have heard something called relative URLs. We will look at it next. But right now, if some path starts with slash, then that is a absolute URL, right? In this case, you see that if a full URL is there, then you have to specify everything, protocol, domain, everything, right? However, in some other sessions I have mentioned that if you omit this protocol, so you simply start the URL with double slash, then it is called implicit protocol, which means that it will use the same protocol which is already used in the current page, currently loaded page, right? If the current page is HTTP, then this will be considered an HTTP URL. If the current page is HTTPS, then it will be considered HTTPS URL, right? But this part where I am not starting with double slash, but I am starting with slash, obviously it is an absolute URL, but what is the implication? The implication is that I have not given protocol, I have not given domain, so both are implicitly assumed, right? So implicit domain name, also it is having implicit protocol. So the whole thing, a protocol and domain name, whatever is the current web page, that thing is as it is, just the path is this thing that we assume. So it uses the same protocol and the same domain name as the currently loaded page URL, right? Okay. Okay, now let's discuss something which are called relative URLs. So the path part of the URL, if it does not start with slash, then it is relative URL. So basically anything, you can understand it like that, that anything, any URL which is not absolute, the converse of it is relative. Anything which is not absolute URL, that is a relative URL. Now we will try to understand that how relative URLs work. As the name suggests, it is relative, which means that there has to be some context relative to what. So let's say right now you are currently at this page, which means that in this page, if in the HTML document of this page, if we encounter some relative URLs, then those relative URLs will be resolved corresponding to this page. And how they will be resolved? So when I'm at this page, which means that there is a inside root, there is you can understand something like path folder is there, then to folder is there, and the pages folder is there. We know that exactly this path might not exist for static web servers. This might exist, but for dynamic web servers, exactly this path might not exist. It's just that we have to just assume that this last part, this is a document, right? Because the currently opened URL is a document, it is an HTML document. So definitely this thing which we are pointing to, that thing is a document, and rest everything, even if that thing actually does not exist or does not exist in the file system, that we don't care, but rest everything separated by slash, we will assume it like a folder, right? So you can assume it like there is a path folder, inside there is a to folder, and inside there is a document called pages. Though that, again I am reminding, that might not be true, but for the purposes of resolving the relative URLs, that is how you have to understand. Now simply if you have a relative URL, something like my page or ./mypage, dot in Unix systems means current folder, which means that they'll be resolved with respect to current folder. Now what is the current folder? Pages is a document, inside which folder? To folder. So you can understand that there is a folder 2 in which pages is there. So what is the current folder? The current folder with respect to pages is 2. 2 is the folder inside which the document pages is there. If you resolve something like this from here, then what is going to happen is that this will be relative to the current folder, which means that this will be relative to the 2 folder, right? So the resolved URL will be something like this, path 2, and with respect to my page will be there. Fair enough? Now the interesting point, there is something called double dot slash. like Unix systems, it will mean that you go to the previous folder and then resolve it like this, right? Which means that if right now I am here, my current folder is what, 2, then if my current folder is 2 to, then I go one step back, which means that if I go to the previous folder right, then I come in path folder. From path folder, I am trying to do my old page, which means that the resolved path will be like this. You are in inside path because you have come outside 2 and went inside a path, and then from there you are resolving my old page, right? So this will be the resolved thing. If you have understood this basic thing, then everything else is like a combination of that, right? So let's say you do double dot slash and then you do something like that, which means that if you are right now at 2 folder, you just go one above and then one above, which means that you come right to the root folder, and from root folder you could do temp archive, which means that from root folder you are doing temp archive. So this will be the resolved path. Now there is an important concept called remote versus local files. Okay, so right now, till now, whatever we were mostly seeing URLs, they were remote URLs. So HTTP or HTTPS was used, and then after that some remote path, some domain name slash path name, something whatever was there, right? That thing is the remote path, which is accessed, we are accessing those files via HTTP protocol, right? But just for information, I would like to mention that there is something called file URLs, right? Whose protocol is file, right? So there are many types of protocols, right? HTTP, HTTPS, FTP and all. Similarly, there is a inbuilt browser protocol called file. What happens that if you want to access your local system files via the browser, then this thing is helpful. So for example, right now, let's say inside here I am having a particular file called demo, right? So this thing, right? And this thing has simply hello world, let's say, right? Now the point is that you can open this file. This is a text file, right? You can open this file directly from browser also. But how do you do that? You do that by writing file slash slash, whatever is normal protocol colon slash slash. However, after that you have to write the full path of this file which you are trying to access via browser, right? Now I want this full path. So let me see. So just this is the full path. It is going to have this followed by the file name was my. So this part, this thing is the whole path, right? We can see that if I see the contents of this file, then this will be hello world. Just now we saw, right? Inside this, the hello world is there. Now the point is that once I have the full path, right, and in Unix system it will mostly start with /, then I can use something like this, file // and then this thing. You understand what is happening? So there are 3 slashes here. You understand why 3 slashes? Because any protocol will start with :/, and then the thing is that you have to write the full local path. Full local path means from root, and that's why the whole path is starting with /, and that's why it comes out to be 3 slash. So many times you might have seen this, but from now you can confidently understand that how it works, right? So when you enter, then you will see that okay, this same thing which hello world was written in that file is visible in the browser. This is browser, right? Which means that I have opened a local file. On my local file system, there is a file. I am able to access that via browser, right? But many times I have already mentioned that this is this is just for a quick glance at some static files. Just drop it, even if you simply drag and drop that file inside the browser, this will open in that fashion. You will see something like file, something like colon triple slash. The point is, this is for a quick glance. This is not for properly testing and properly running the your website stuff, right? Why? Because uh, because there are some restrictions to the file URLs which I just mentioned, right? So they are okay for accessing static files, but they don't access asynchronous remote requests. These are called AJAX calls or XML HTTP calls. We will learn it later. But the point is that when you are trying to do some remote call, they will not go through, and that's why it was. So there is what we are building websites. These are very common things, right? So what is the point of simply then opening? So some static file is there, some with some static text or some static HTML, then that is fine. More importantly, this text file calling something from text file does not make sense. So let's say this is some HTML file, right? Some index.html file, right? And from inside, if you're trying to make some asynchronous remote request, those will fail. And that's why these are not much used in development. And similarly, you can't access the remote files from inside this file also, right? The same thing. So the point is that just I told you that there is something called a file protocol, but we will never access, even if I want to access this file, right? But I want HTTP protocol rather than this file protocol, and then my things will work properly, right? Obviously, things will work whatever as per if we have some HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but we have not come to that point, and that's why I will give you simply example with this text file only, that I can run this text file also with HTTP protocol. And how can I do that? So later we will see how to do that, but I already have a package installed and I will just run that. You don't have to bother about that, how that works, how that is installed and something. I will just show you, nothing else, right? So the point is that you have to go to the folder where that file is there. See, that file is there, right? And I have already installed a package which I showed you. This is an npm package, but don't bother. We'll see it later. The point is that serve is a package. Dot means the current folder. It means that please serve the current folder using HTTP protocol. That's it. That's what it is doing, right? And once you do that, it says that okay, now the current folder inside demo you were there, right? The current folder is now being served using localhost, obviously, right? Because we discussed that when we are trying to do development locally, then the localhost will be the loopback address where like this is like HTTP web server. Like this is what this is not a dynamic server. This is a static example of static web server, right? So we have a static HTTP server running on our system with the loopback address, which means the server and the client both are our system only, and that's why we have to use localhost. But that is not the point. The point is that once we have got this running, then you see that I can access the same file, but here it was file protocol. Now this is HTTP protocol. You can see that this is HTTP protocol, right? Now, since this is HTTP protocol, it comes with a lot of advantages, right? Now it is simple text file, right? But as I told you earlier, that we could have a proper HTML, CSS, JavaScript, let's say all the code inside this demo folder, and if we start something like this with HTTP protocol, then that will be a proper static web server without these restrictions, which means that we don't need to bother about these things. Everything will properly work. And then this is just about serving static files. Dynamic files, obviously we will come back to that at a later point of time. Okay, so I believe most of the part from this side is done. So just now let's go to some of the questions which I want to pose to you. So the first question is, can multiple devices connected to the internet have the same IP address? Right? So read the language of the question carefully. I have not said what type of IP address or what type of device. I'm simply saying, and my question is as per the simple language, right? Simple, multiple devices connected to the internet, and means they connected to the internet in the sense that devices which can access internet, and they have the same IP address, right? Okay, so I will just give you a hint that the IP address which is actually assigned to your device on the network might be different from actually the IP address which is publicly exposed. This we understood in some external and internal IP address lectures, right? So just wanted to highlight this thing, that let's say if you type what is my IP, right, then you will see something like this, right? Now this is like some people will get IP version 4. In my case it is getting IP version 6, but the point is that this might not be the IP address of my device. This might be the IP address which is exposed through my router, right? So that is the point. That is the point. Those things can be different. So that's why try to think about the language carefully. I'm not saying that. So just plain and simple, can multiple devices have to connect, which are connected to the internet, have the same IP address? Just a simple thing, right? Okay. The next thing is that, is there a way to know who is the owner of a particular domain name, right? Which means that, let's say I want to meet the owner of some domain, let's say google.com or flipkart.com, right? Is there a way to connect to that, who maintains this domain name? I want to get in touch with them because of any reasons, let's say, right? Whatever. Let's say I opened a random some website, right? And then I found something that I want to connect with the owner of this domain name, but I have no idea which country this guy is, where, what is this? I have no idea, right? Is there a way I can get in touch with the owner of a particular domain name? That is the second question. Just try to explore this. Now, this is the last question, or second last question, I think, where I'm saying that, okay, many times we have said DNS server, DNS is what? DNS is a resolution mechanism from domain names to IP addresses. Browser goes to the DNS server, which maintains all the records of these mappings, and then but then who maintains this DNS server? Who maintains this DNS server? And you understand this, right? Everybody is querying these DNS servers. Everybody, like, so might be they are getting billions of requests. So they might have like huge number of servers. The point is that who is maintaining them? And if anybody is maintaining them, who is paying for this? Who is paying for this? Because these are like mammoth things, right? Many things are going to be, many people millions of times are accessing these servers, right? So who is paying the bills for these servers, right? Just think about it. That is one of the questions. Okay. Next is this. So let's say the current page URL is this thing. This is the complete URL, right? This is the URL at which you are right now. From here, I am trying to resolve a relative URL, right? And which relative URL I'm trying to do this, right? So after root, there are two levels, path and pages. But the relative URL I'm trying to access is //// three times. I have gone to the back folder sort of thing, right? And then my page. What do you think is the final resolved complete URL which we will get when something like this is we are trying to access something like this on this page? Okay, that is the question. Okay, so we will finish this module here right now. See you later.